For those of you thinking about building foliage that grows beyond a certain point relative to the eye, such as a tree, remember that the figure that's going to be navigating these landscapes is based off of about a 5-foot tall bipedal person. So if foliage starts to enter that 5-foot point of view, we're going to really have our eye lined right up to whatever this object is and the textures, etc. So it might be a good idea to think about as we start to grow larger objects, or if we want to show them in more isolation, less frequency in a group, that we're probably going to want to think about a more articulated object or plant or whatever you're thinking about these foliage items as. So here we have a tree that is much more three-dimensional. It's really kind of a rectangular prism that's been subdivided and kind of grown out. And then we've got these leaves on top. So let's take a look at how to do that. I've got another template file for you here that includes the UE4 mannequin for reference. It also includes a HDRI for lighting your scene. And I've also got it separated into 2 folders, 2 collections, leaves and trunk. So before we start working in our tree template, I do want to save it with a new name. I'm going to save it as I'm going to start with a new kind of mesh object, and that's going to be a cylinder. And before we click enter or click away, I want to check down here in the add cylinder options where it says vertices. You might have this by default set to something like 32, I think. And that's kind of looks like a pretty nice cylinder. If we bring this down to 3, a 3-sided cylinder is like a triangular prism, so that's sort of interesting. If we bring it to 4, we've got a rectangular prism. I'm going to bring this up to just like 6. You could bring it to 8 too. Let's try that, sure. So we'll have an octagon that we're going to extrude out. It's going to be fairly low polygon at the end of the day, but it's going to be more dense than we've been making so far. I'm also going to turn this back to shaded mode. So with our 8-sided prism, I'm going to click somewhere outside and we're going to accept that. So I'm going to tab into edit mode and make sure I have face select on. Click somewhere on our shape here. And I'm going to scale this down somewhat so we start to taper the trunk of our tree. And we can press extrude E on the keyboard. I can move this over. I can scale it. I can rotate it. Scale it some more. And we can press E. And notice how it's going to keep extruding in the direction of the kind of relative Z axis. That's what that blue line is. If we want to avoid that, I'm going to go back. We can also just be a little more free form about this by holding down Control and right clicking. And it's just going to extrude to wherever our cursor is. So I'm going to do that again, maybe from a slightly different vantage point. Hold down Control, right click, scale down. I'm going to give it some rotation. And again, actually let's rotate in the direction we want to click next. Hold down Control and right click and scale down, taper it. Now what if we want to branch going the other direction? Well, let's click edge select mode and come down on one of our vertical edges that's going the length of the trunk. And hold down Control and press R and click, and I'm going to move this up somewhere where we want that branch to divert. Go back to face select mode, and I'm going to press E, move that out. We can move it up, we can rotate it, we can scale it. Okay, notice how we're going to have a lot less geometry on that branch. So what I'm going to try to do is go to X-ray mode and select all of that and right click subdivide. And I'm going to subdivide that once. And I'm going to turn off X-ray mode. You can see if we go back into edit mode. Okay, I've got more edges here. And I want to move those out so we're getting a little bit more definition, more roundness there. We're not going to simply get round geometry by adding more edges. We're going to have to actually move them. So somewhat hexagonal. We don't really need it to be perfect because it is going to be a tree or something. So I'll go back to edge select mode. Scale this down. Go back to face select mode. Extrude this, we can again hold down Control and right click. Scale it down. Maybe move it back some. Control. Rotate it, Control, right click, and I'm going to scale this down. Okay, so we're just going to have a 2-branched tree for this demonstration. Next, we're going to want to add some geometry that's going to become our foliage built onto the tree. You could use similar techniques to what we've used so far. You could bring in, an atlas and trace it out and cut it out, but I'm going to do something a little more quick. I'm going to make a new plane. I'm going to move it somewhere where we can see it a little better. And I'm going to go into edit mode. And I'm going to subdivide this maybe 4 times. And then what I'm going to do, maybe go to Vertex select mode. And with my proportional editing on, I'm just going to kind of move this around. Try different scales of proportional editing. But I want to give this some... I'll tab out of that, and both of these objects I want to shade smooth. So we can select both of them, right click, shade smooth. And now let's bring in some textures. So I'm going to go to the shading workspace, and I'm going to select my plane down here, and I'm going to click new, call this leaves. And I'm going to drag in some textures. I'm going to bring in some color textures. Make sure we are in material preview mode. Bring in an alpha mask. And we want to make sure our shader material properties are down here and their settings set to alpha clip. Okay, so there's maybe one set of leaves that we're going to now copy. And I want to go ahead and take care of the tree while we're here too. So I'm going to make a new material and call it okay. And I'm going to drag in some materials. Okay, and we can see when I bring in my texture for my base color here, it's looking really stretched and strange. So we're going to need to go to UV editing, and you guessed it, we're going to have to UV unwrap this, because as it stands, we do have some UV unwrapping from that primary cylinder, but it's not going to do the trick. So we're going to UV, Smart UV Project, and we can leave those defaults. If we go back to Material Preview, we can see now, it might not be the best thing. We know how to manually UV unwrap. We certainly can, but that's going to be good enough for now. So I'm going to go back to the Layout tab, and I am going to turn on Material Preview. I'm going to select my tree shape, and I'm going to go down here to Object Data Properties. I'm going to make a new vertex group and call this Branches. Press Enter. And I'm going to then click on Object Mode and go to Weight Paint. Okay, this is a way we can kind of show where we want certain features. And I'm going to make sure I'm painting with a weight of 1 and a strength of 1. And I can paint right here, and you can see how it's kind of like when we were vertex painting, how the vertices are holding color, but this is a different kind of color information. Vertex painting is red for some types of information. Weight painting is going to be more specific to making particle systems or armatures for bones, that kind of thing. Okay, so we just want the leaves kind of on the branches here, maybe a little bit more. Maybe we can bring it down a little bit more like that. We can always come back and tune this. Okay, we're going to go back to object mode. And now we're going to go over to where it says particle properties, and we're going to make a new particle system. We're going to change this to hair, check the advanced box. Down here where it says vertex groups, we're going to select our branches vertex group, and you can see now how this preview is limited to that region. Under render, we're going to change render as from path to object, and our instance object, we're going to use this eyedropper and confine our leaves. Okay, looks a little silly at the moment. Let's play with the scale. Okay, we're also going to scale randomness. I would push that kind of as far as you can. And we're going to check this box rotation, change this to global Z, and again push our randomization out. Maybe play with randomize phase. Okay, what I would do here is now maybe it's time to go back to weight painting. And if our particle system is in the way of our weight painting, we can hide it here in the viewport. And I'm going to turn my weight down to 0. And actually, I'm going to undo. I'm going to pull back some of those vertices that we've made more hot, more ready to accept our cookie leaves. Okay, and we have so few vertices. This is going to kind of be a choppy kind of paint result. Again, there's kind of our vertices. So I have to come all the way back up here. Let's see what it looks like just on the tips of the branches. Let's go back to object mode and turn back on our particle system. And it looks like it hasn't changed. And I've noticed this as a problem in Blender a lot. We're going to select that object and make sure we're down in our object data properties and go into edit mode. And you can see, if you don't see anything selected, we're going to select that vertex group branches, click select, and you can see what pieces it still thinks are selected, even though we painted them back to be 0 weight. It's a good idea to go in here and just double check. So I'm going to toggle X-ray, and I'm actually going to select the regions that we don't want to be hot anymore, and click remove. So I'm going to click away, make sure we have nothing selected, and now I'm going to go back to branches and click select. That looks a little better. So I'm going to get out of edit mode, press tab, and I'm somewhat happy with that. Yeah, we can see those changes are now following through. Let's go back to our particle settings. I'm going to change this number to something more like 10. And I'm going to play with that scale some more. And then maybe we'll bring up that number. So there we have some kind of tree shape with some branches and some leaves. Okay, before we export this, we want to make sure that these leaves are going to blow in the wind. So I'm going to select our leaf base, and I'm going to make sure I've got viewport shading solid mode on. I'm going to go to vertex paint, not weight paint, vertex paint. And I'm going to make sure all of my vertices are selected. And go back to vertex paint mode. Select black, because Unreal is going to read black as animated in this case. And Shift K. And in object mode, let's go ahead and give these pieces some names. I'm going to call this trunk. I'm going to call this leaf base. So what we're going to do now is we're going to turn this particle system into actual meshes. With the trunk object selected, we're going to go to modifier properties and click convert. And you can see all of these meshes have just been created. That's a whole lot of things. Before we click away or change what we're doing, with all of those selected, I'm going to click and hold and drag to leaves. And I'm going to close that out. Then I'm going to hide leaf base. And we can see we've still got that particle system under our trunk. So I'm then going to go to particle system and turn off in both render and real time. So we've got all these different meshes now. We can go ahead and join this if we want. I'm going to click on this, select A for select all, and Control J. And now we've got them joined together. Now if we look at the trunk, it is going down into the ground, And I'm actually okay with that. I'm okay with the origin being a little bit higher than the base. We want to make sure that this tree shape is firmly planted underneath our terrain. And then our final step before we export is to make sure this scale is set how we want it to be in Unreal Engine. So let's turn on our scale reference, and I can't even see it. So I'm going to press S and drag down, and sure enough, there is our friend hiding inside of the trunk. Let's move the character somewhere else for now, and then we can scale this. Okay, so I'm happy with that scale. So I'm gonna hide the mannequin. And before I export, I'm gonna wanna check that our scale is applied over here in Object Properties. It is right now a percentage of 1. So I'm gonna click on the object, hold down Control, press A on the keyboard, and apply all transforms. Click on our trunk, which has been joined with the leaves, and go to File, Export, FBX. I'm gonna call this cookies, and we can actually use the same preset that we made when we were doing the rest of our foliage, and we can press export.